Sometimes, the most dangerous invitations are the ones we never send. It began with a sealed envelope, marked in crimson wax, and addressed to a man who despised surprises. Inside lay a secret powerful enough to turn fear into murder and curiosity into peril. In a world of pride, deceit, and justice disguised as vengeance, even the great mind of Nero Wolfe would find that some letters should never be opened. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Settle in, because this mystery begins now. If there's one thing that can rattle the foundation of Nero Wolfe's brownstone, it's a missing meal. That day, Fritz was pacing the kitchen like a condemned man waiting for the governor's call, and the dining room table looked naked without its usual display of domestic glory. I leaned in the doorway, hands in pockets, and said, "What's the matter, Fritz? The cow refused to cooperate." He moaned softly. "Mr. Wolfe says no lunch, Archie. No lunch." That got me. Wolfe skipping lunch is like Niagara deciding to take a day off. I went up to his office and found him at his desk, not reading, not dictating, not breathing normally. His lips were pressed thin enough to make him look almost human. "Archie," he said, "I have endured insolence, presumption, and folly, but today's affront transcends all three." "That's swell," I said, "but could we affront it over lamb cutlets?" He glared. "Lunch is suspended. I will not dine while indignity lingers." And that's when I knew something or someone had already lost the day. 10 minutes later, the bell rang. Fritz, pale but obedient, brought a card upstairs. Wolfe took one glance and snorted. "Martin Latham," he read aloud, as if the name itself smelled of bad perfume. "A financier whose vulgarity exceeds his fortune." "He's downstairs," I said. "Looks expensive, loud, and very sure he's doing us a favour." "Then you will do me a greater one," Wolfe replied. "Show him out." I went down, ready to deliver my best diplomatic brush-off. Latham stood in the hallway like a man expecting applause, his coat too glossy, his cufflinks too loud. "I have business with Wolfe," he barked. I gave him the grin that usually precedes trouble. "And Wolfe refuses to have business with you. You're unlisted in his diet." His face flushed, but I could see confusion under the bluster. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, opening the door, "but not before dinner." He stormed out, leaving the air charged and my curiosity nicely warmed. Wolfe was still simmering when I came back up. The office smelled faintly of orchids and fury. "I suppose," he said, "that the man attempted to barter his way into my presence." "He did," I said, dropping into my chair, "but he looked more scared than smug." "Bah! Wealth dilutes courage." Wolfe leaned back and steepled his fingers. "Men like Latham assume intellect is for hire." "Yeah, well, he didn't look like he came to hire a brain, more like to unload a ghost." That got him. His eyes opened a fraction wider, which for Wolfe is the equivalent of a scream. Then he shut them again. "Irrelevant. He is dismissed from thought." I didn't argue. But something about Latham's retreat, the way he'd glanced back at the brownstone, suggested he'd left more behind than footprints. It was Fritz who found it first, dusting near the globe stand in the office. "Mr. Archie, sir," he said, holding it as if it might explode. "This was not here this morning." It was a thick, cream envelope, sealed with red wax bearing the initials NW, Wolfe's own. I took it, weighed it, and said, "If this is Wolfe's way of writing to himself, he's finally lost it." When I handed it to Wolfe, he frowned as though I'd insulted his ancestry. "Preposterous. I have sent no correspondence. Fritz, where was this found?" "On the table, sir. It gleamed." "Gleamed," Wolfe repeated grimly. He turned it over. The wax was unbroken, the paper untouched. "Archie, the seal is imitation, crude, but convincing. Some admirer with access to office supplies. Or an enemy with access to insolence, he said. That's Wolfe. Insult first, investigate later. He placed the envelope on the desk, not opening it. It sat there like a loaded gun nobody wanted to touch. Fritz wanted to call the police before dessert. It could be a threat, Mr. Wolfe, he pleaded. Or something dangerous. Nonsense, Wolfe said, waving a hand the size of a small ham. No one threatens me by stationery. I leaned back in my chair. What if it's a bomb? Then Archie, Wolfe replied smoothly, you will have the satisfaction of dying at your post. I told him I'd prefer satisfaction of a more continued nature. Fritz wrung his hands and muttered prayers in German. Finally, Wolfe rose, which is always an event worth marking, and said, we shall not succumb to hysteria. Pride and patience, gentlemen. That made two of us liars and one nervous wreck. But pride's a strong drug, and Wolfe was too far gone to take the antidote. The afternoon dragged. No lunch, no conversation, no answers. The envelope sat on Wolfe's desk like an uninvited guest. I tried everything short of interpretive dance to get him talking, but Wolfe was somewhere between furious and fascinated. Around 3, he finally said, Archie, it is not the insult that unsettles me. It is the design. I raised an eyebrow. Design. Indeed, whoever mimicked my seal did so with purpose. They wished to provoke curiosity, mine, not yours. That is impertinence compounded. So we're being baited. Yes, and I, confound it, am tempted to bite. I grinned. Then we're doomed. Curiosity's your favorite. Sin. He sighed, as if the whole world had suddenly turned stupid. Archie, refrain from epigrams. Bring beer. When Wolfe turns to alcohol before 4 o'clock, something's officially wrong. By evening, the envelope was still unbroken, though Wolfe hadn't looked away from it for more than 30 seconds all day. He called it a provocation unworthy of response, but his fingers kept twitching toward it. Fritz brought dinner, untouched again, and the silence grew so thick it could have been carved. Finally, I said, you're going to open it. I am not. Of course not, I said. You're just glaring it into confession. He scowled. Archie, the most dangerous traps are those baited for intellect. Maybe, I said, but the dumb ones usually step on them first. He gave a sound halfway between a grunt and a growl. Enough. Tomorrow, perhaps. But when I left the office an hour later, I glanced back through the door crack. Wolfe was still staring at the envelope, and I'd have sworn his hand was halfway to breaking the seal. If there's one thing sacred in Wolfe's brownstone, it's breakfast. Fritz had just placed a plate of eggs that looked like they'd been sculpted by angels when the bell rang. Wolfe scowled at the interruption, and I said, maybe it's the milkman bringing condolences. Fritz returned, pale. A lady, sir, in mourning. Wolfe looked up sharply. At this hour? Any hour, I said, is bad for grief. He groaned and reached for his napkin like a man surrendering a crown. Very well, Archie. Bring her in before she dissolves on my doorstep. I ushered in Mrs. Celia Latham, tall, composed, the kind of widow whose perfume arrives before her tears. Her black gloves trembled slightly as she clutched her handbag. Mr. Wolfe, she said, voice breaking, my husband is dead. Wolfe didn't rise, but his eyes narrowed. You have my condolences, madam, and evidently a purpose. She nodded, trembling. I think it wasn't natural. That got Wolfe's full attention, and my eggs went stone cold. Mrs. Latham sank into the red chair like it was the last solid thing left in her life. She was one of those women who could make sorrow look like art. Her hands shook, but her eyes didn't. My husband, Martin Latham, she began, died last night, in his study. They say it was his heart, but he was strong, careful, never ill. Wolfe leaned back, fingers tented. And you suspect otherwise? I know otherwise, she said. He received this. She reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope. Cream paper. Crimson wax seal. The exact twin of the one Wolfe still hadn't opened. I let out a low whistle. Popular stationery. Wolfe took it without comment, studying the seal with the delicacy of a jeweler appraising a counterfeit diamond. "Madam," he said slowly, "before you continue, tell me, how did this reach you?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It didn't. It reached him, just before he died." Wolfe turned the envelope under the light. "Identical," he muttered. "The same impression, the same flawed curvature on the right edge. Someone is imitating me with remarkable precision." "Or devotion," I said. "You've finally got a fan club." He ignored that. "Archie, note the wax. Carmine, not crimson. Cheaper blend, common in commercial correspondence. And yet..." He stopped, brow furrowing. Mrs. Latham clutched her purse. "Mr. Wolfe, what does it mean?" "It means," he said, "that your husband's death and this absurd parody of my seal are not coincidences. Who else has seen this?" "No one. I brought it straight here." He nodded. "Wise, though not necessarily safe. The author of this theatre may be watching." That did wonders for the widow's colour. Wolfe placed the envelope beside its twin on the desk, the two crimson seals gleaming under the lamp like twin warnings. For once, even I didn't have a wisecrack handy. When Wolfe began asking about her late husband's business, Mrs. Latham hesitated like a woman choosing between truth and survival. "Martin managed a charity fund," she said softly. "The St. Aurelian Relief Committee. They handle donations, large ones. $250,000 was misplaced." "Misplaced," I repeated. "That's a polite word." She glanced at me, then back to Wolfe. "There were rumours. My husband said he'd fix it quietly, but he was frightened. He said someone knew." "Someone?" Wolfe asked. "A rival, an associate?" "Both," she murmured. "Howard Dane, his partner, and Gordon Vance, his attorney. They dined with us the night before he died." "Convenient company," I said. Wolfe's eyes glimmered. "Indeed. And now you wish me to determine whether your husband was murdered, and by which of his companions?" She looked down. "I only want the truth." "The truth," Wolfe said, "is rarely charitable." And judging by her face, she already knew it. For a long minute, Wolfe said nothing. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock and Mrs. Latham's uneven breathing. Then her composure cracked like thin ice. "They say he died peacefully," she whispered. "But he was terrified, Mr. Wolfe. Terrified." Her gloved hands clutched at the air. Fritz, hovering by the door with a tray of coffee, froze mid-step, as if he'd stumbled into the wrong play. "Madam," Wolfe said at last, "tears will not hasten deduction. They obscure it." I offered her a handkerchief, which she ignored. "He didn't deserve this," she sobbed. "He was trying to do right." "Many men have died of that impulse," Wolfe muttered. "You may proceed, after regaining control of your faculties." She nodded shakily, dabbing at her eyes. Fritz slipped away like a ghost escaping melodrama, I thought. Even Wolfe looked faintly guilty, but that might have been the lighting. Once she steadied herself, Wolfe's tone softened, marginally. "Mrs. Latham, you come seeking justice, not comfort. I deal only in the former. I'll pay whatever you ask." "Indeed you will," he said dryly. "But first, I must decide if the problem merits attention." That line usually means he's already decided yes. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, stirred it precisely 3 times, then said, "A forged seal, a dead financier, and a missing $250,000. Intriguing, if vulgar." She stared at him, half desperate, half bewildered. "You'll help me?" "I shall employ myself in the matter," he corrected. "Whether that results in help is secondary," I said. "Translation: you've got him hooked, lady." Wolfe shot me a glare sharp enough to slice onions. "Archie, You will make the necessary inquiries. Begin with the husband's circle. Mrs. Latham exhaled in relief. Wolfe didn't smile, but the set of his shoulders gave him away. He was in it now, waist deep and pretending not to notice. When the widow finally left, the air in the office felt thicker, like it had just absorbed someone's secrets. I walked her to the door, watching her glide down the steps, every move rehearsed. She turned once before stepping into her cab. There wasn't gratitude in her eyes, there was calculation. It hit me like a cold draft. I went back upstairs. Wolfe was at his desk, already reaching for a beer. "Well," I said, "you've done it. Another damsel in black, another corpse to disturb your digestion." He grunted. "Archie, you will kindly refrain from dramatics. The woman is aggrieved, not duplicitous. Want to bet lunch on that?" He ignored me, pouring the beer into his glass with ceremonial precision. "This business is a web. We shall see who is spider and who is fly." "Sure," I said, "but something tells me we just got invited to dinner, and the menu's poison." He didn't argue. For Wolfe, that was worse than agreement. The Latham place sat on Fifth Avenue like it was allergic to daylight, a mansion built for money but haunted by manners. I'd seen cheerier crypts. The butler opened the door with the enthusiasm of a man greeting an undertaker, and the air inside had that special mix of wax polish and whispered guilt. "Mr. Latham is indisposed," I said. The butler twitched. "Dead," I added helpfully. He flinched. "Yes, sir. This way." The drawing room was big enough to echo regrets. Portraits of men who'd probably embezzled more tastefully than the current generation looked down in judgment. I'd been sent to observe, Wolfe's polite word for digging. The widow's absence meant the supporting cast had the stage to themselves, and they weren't hiding their discomfort well. Every polished surface reflected a different shade of unease. I didn't know who'd killed Martin Latham yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Grief didn't live here. Fear did. And fear, like champagne, tends to spill when shaken. If funerals are roll calls for guilt, this one had perfect attendance. I met them one by one. Howard Dane, the business partner, shook my hand like he expected it to explode. His wife, Veronica, managed to smile without moving her eyes, a trick most cobras learn early. Dr. Edwin Poole had the look of a man who trusted alcohol more than medicine, and he smelled like his patient list was mostly whiskey bottles. Gordon Vance, the lawyer, was slick enough to slide uphill. His cufflinks gleamed louder than his conscience. Then came Evelyn Ross, the secretary, quiet, composed, the kind of woman who'd notice everything and report nothing unless paid in sincerity, which nobody there could afford. They all shared the same expression, polite boredom laced with dread. When I told them I was there on behalf of Mr. Wolfe, half the room stiffened, and the other half started lying in advance. It was shaping up to be a lively evening, for a dead man's company. Dinner was served by the staff, but the main course was silence. I took my cues from the maid. Servants always gossip when you look like you're not listening. It started as murmurs, how Mr. Latham had received a note during the meal, delivered by hand, crimson wax seal, no name, no sender. By the time dessert came, the chatter stopped cold. Latham had read the note, gone pale as the linen, and left the table without finishing his port. When I asked what happened after, the butler coughed like he'd swallowed secrets. "He said he needed air," the maid whispered. But he went to his study, locked it. The doctor pronounced him dead an hour later. Heart attack, naturally. Sure. Hearts don't usually stop because of dessert menus. I didn't say that out loud. I just smiled, thanked them, and made a mental note to check the study first. Dead men leave better clues than dinner guests. Howard Dane cornered me first. His nerves rattled louder than the chandelier. Martin was overstressed, the fun situation, you know. I nodded. 250,000 missing tends to weigh on a man. His wife swooped in before he could elaborate, perfume first, words later. Martin's death was tragic, But Howard had nothing to do with it. None of us did. That was a fine confession to nothing in particular. Dr. Poole joined the chorus with glassy eyes. "It's grief," he said solemnly, "and the burgundy was exceptional." I told him I'd stick to coffee. He blinked twice, as if insulted, and wandered off in search of a refill. The DA couldn't have staged better contradictions. Every word confirmed what I already felt. The truth had been served at that dinner, and everyone was still choking on it. Gordon Vance approached next, smooth as a cat on velvet. "You're Wolfe's man, aren't you? I've heard of his methods. Mostly from clients who end up regretting theirs," I said. He chuckled. "I admired Martin, but he wasn't the saint his wife pretends. The charity fund, let's say there were discrepancies. And Dane had his own debts. You see the picture." "I do," I said. "Looks like everyone framed it together." He smiled too wide. "Be careful, Mr. Goodwin. Charity attracts parasites." "Occupational hazard," I said. "I'm vaccinated." He laughed again, but there was sweat on his temple. I'd seen cleaner liars in backroom poker games. When lawyers start offering theories without being asked, it's either because they're innocent, or they want you to think so. I didn't buy either version. I was heading for the door when Evelyn Ross appeared, soundless as a thought. Up close, she looked too tired for deceit, but too composed for innocence. "Mr. Goodwin," she said quietly, "you shouldn't be here after dark." "Occupational hazard again," I said. "Keeps me off the streets." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "You asked about the envelope?" "That's right." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't let Mr. Wolfe open his." That was enough to freeze my wisecracks. "Why?" But she was already retreating, eyes darting toward the staircase. "Some invitations shouldn't be answered," she said, then vanished behind a closing door. I stood there for a long second, debating whether to chase her or get the butler to confess to eavesdropping. Then I remembered Wolfe's warning about curiosity, his and mine, and decided we were both overdue for trouble. I left the mansion with more questions than names. Back at the brownstone I found Peace, Beer, and Wolfe, in that order. He was reading when I came in, pretending disinterest. I'd barely started my report when something upstairs creaked. Wolfe's head lifted. "Fritz." "No," I said. "Fritz doesn't creak." We both listened. Another step, slow, deliberate, above us. Wolfe's eyes narrowed and he gestured toward the drawer where the revolver lived. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard it, a rustle from the office. I swung the door open, nothing but the faint scent of cologne and the draft from the window. Then I saw it, the sealed envelope, Wolfe's crimson wax masterpiece. Gone. I came back down fast. "We've got company, and they shop for stationery." Wolfe's expression went black. "Archie, we are now entangled in a drama I did not solicit." "Sure," I said, checking the window locks. "But you're already the star." And from the look on his face, he knew it. I don't usually see much action at 2 a.m. unless it involves coffee or a client with insomnia. But that night, the brownstone decided to host an unscheduled guest. I was in my room going over my notes when I heard a soft bump. The kind that doesn't belong in a house where even Fritz tiptoes. Another. Sound followed. A faint scrape from Wolfe's office. I grabbed the revolver, crossed the hall, and saw a shadow gliding along Wolfe's bookshelves. Whoever it was had nerve, or a death wish. I lunged, catching him square in the middle of the rug Wolfe calls Persian, not domestic. The guy swung, I ducked, and we danced a few steps before he bolted for the window. By the time I reached it, he was gone, into the night, leaving behind nothing but a scuff mark on Wolfe's rug and a faint smell of cheap cologne. That, and one very expensive-looking glove. It was a good glove, soft leather, monogrammed HD. Whoever owned it had taste, money, and lousy timing. I bagged it in an envelope before Wolfe could complain about contamination of evidence. When he finally lumbered down from the plant rooms, robe belted like a Roman senator interrupted mid-empire, I filled him in. He examined the glove, sniffed disdainfully, and said, "A fool. A nocturnal fool." "Maybe," I said, "but one who knew exactly where to look. He went straight for your desk." That made Wolfe's brow twitch, which, for him, equals a full gasp. Then the objective was the envelope, and since it was not taken, he was interrupted by your athletic intervention. "I try to keep my form," I said. He handed me the glove. "Howard Dane," he muttered. "The initials. If it is indeed his, we have a paradox, audacity matched with idiocy." The paradox got solved faster than we expected, and not by us. By breakfast, the mood in the brownstone had turned from annoyed to volcanic. Fritz's waffles were untouched, which is always the first sign of catastrophe. "Archie," Wolfe said, glaring over his coffee, "this house has been violated. Our sanctum has suffered indignity." "I noticed," I said. "Want me to call a priest or just a locksmith?" He ignored me. "That someone dared to intrude here is intolerable. That they did so clumsily is offensive. I insist upon the restoration of order." "Meaning what? We file a complaint or launch a counterattack?" He frowned. "Neither. We preserve equilibrium. You will not indulge Kramer's enthusiasm by informing him. I shall do so, at my leisure." "Which means never." He sipped his coffee. "Precisely. But the universe, as usual, refused to take orders from Nero Wolfe. At 9:45 sharp, our bell rang like a fire alarm, and on the doorstep stood Inspector Kramer, grinning as if he'd found the Last Supper in our mailbox. Kramer pushed past me before I could invent a reason not to let him in. He carried a paper bag and the smell of satisfaction. "Morning, Wolfe. You lose anything last night?" Wolfe scowled. "My patience." Kramer ignored that. "Because we found something. This." He pulled out a photo of the same glove I'd found, already tagged and logged. "Recognize it?" "I do," Wolfe said. "You may return it to its owner." "That's the tricky part," Kramer said, enjoying himself. "Owner's name is Howard Dane, or was. Found him dead this morning. Backseat of a cab parked outside the Belmont." That took even Wolfe aback. He leaned forward. "Dead. Dead as a debate," Kramer said. "Driver says he just slumped over. And guess what he had in his pocket? Another one of those fancy red-sealed envelopes you've been collecting." Wolfe's nostrils flared. "Pfui, a grotesque repetition." Kramer grinned wider. "Or maybe just a pattern you missed. Kramer's version of a victory lap always includes details no one asked for. Cab picked him up at 10:40 last night alone," he said. "Driver says Dane gave an address, then halfway there, he just quit breathing. No struggle, no noise. The guy thought he'd passed out until the next fare screamed." "Cause of death?" I asked. Kramer shrugged. "Doctor says heart attack. I don't buy it. Not after this." He held up the evidence bag with the envelope inside. The same crimson wax, the same mocking seal. Wolfe reached for it, examined it briefly, then set it down like it offended his sense of order. "Inspector, when you have finished your display, leave that here. You will receive the benefit of my analysis later." "I'll wait," Kramer said, parking himself in my chair. "You will not," Wolfe thundered. Kramer chuckled but went. The moment the door closed, Wolfe muttered, "2 deaths, same token. We are dealing with an intellect, malignant, but disciplined." And I had the uneasy feeling that intellect wasn't done performing. The reports came in that afternoon. Dane's death mirrored Latham's down to the last pulse. No bruising, no trauma, just a sudden end and a neat red envelope for garnish. Wolfe read the papers in silence, lips pressed tight. "The symmetry is obscene," he said finally. "A killer who values proportion above morality." I said, "So we've got an artist." "A dilettante," Wolfe corrected. "Precision without comprehension. He imitates form, not essence." "Meaning?" "Meaning he kills to construct, not to conceal." That was typical Wolfe. 10 words where 2 might do, but somehow they still made sense. He looked at me. Archie, summon Mr. Panzer. I wish to confirm a theory. Saul's busy. Then pay him double. I knew better than to argue. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. There is design here, he murmured, and design implies motive. He was right, of course, and by evening, the design would turn from pattern to panic. The autopsy report hit Kramer's desk and bounced straight to ours. The coroner had found something new, a trace compound on Dane's fingertips and lips. Not a solid, not quite a liquid, something that evaporated faster than Wolfe's patience with police procedure. An evaporating toxin, Wolfe mused, pacing, which means he moved 3 full steps. Ingenious, it dissipates, within hours, leaving no trace. A perfect instrument for murder and a declaration of intellect. Sure, I said. Also murder. He shot me a look. Spare me moral commentary. The killer is a chemist, or has one at his disposal. Both victims received the same envelope. Ergo, contact poison, transmitted through wax or paper. Nice. So I'll start wearing gloves. Do, Wolfe said dryly. You may live to regret it less. He turned toward the window, his bulk framed like a statue of judgment. This poison is not merely lethal, Archie. It is ephemeral. It kills and vanishes, as if mocking the very notion of detection. That's poetic, I said. But I'd rather it mocked somebody else next time. His grunt was agreement, but the kind that promised things were about to get worse. Kramer arrived at 11, loud enough to scare the orchids, and smug enough to annoy me before he'd said a word. He marched into the office waving a folder like it contained the 10 Commandments. Well, Wolfe, I've got your suspects lined up. Every last one of them. Wolfe didn't look up from his book. You have them, or you have bewildered citizens whose only crime is acquaintance. Kramer's grin widened. Howard Dane's widow, Latham's lawyer, the doctor, the secretary. They're all tangled in it. One of them's your poisoner. I see, Wolfe murmured. So, as usual, the city is safe except for the guilty. That was too subtle for Kramer. You think you're funny. I've got men checking every lab in the state for that fancy toxin. We'll find it. Wolfe sighed. I doubt it. Poison that disappears leaves only intelligence behind, a substance with which you have little experience. Kramer turned purple. I poured him coffee before he exploded. It didn't help much. When Kramer stormed out, the room was 10 degrees cooler. Wolfe stared after him as if contemplating whether stupidity was contagious. Archie, he said, have you ever observed the peculiar genius of institutional blindness? I've dated it a few times, I said. He frowned. The police collectively possess a rare gift, the ability to see everything except the obvious. They collect fragments, confuse volume with value, and call it diligence. Translation. Kramer's barking up the wrong suspect again. Indubitably. The murderer is not improvising. This is orchestration, not chance. Each death, each envelope, a crescendo of vanity. I leaned against the desk. So we're chasing a musical genius with homicidal tendencies. He waved me off. Do not anthropomorphize madness. Retrieve your coat. You will visit Mrs. Dane. That's Wolfe for romance, sending me to flirt with a widow who might also be a killer. At least the job had its perks. Veronica Dane lived in an apartment that could make the Ritz feel underdressed. When she opened the door, I understood why men forgot, their vows around her. Grief had been replaced by glamour and a dash of danger. Mr. Goodwin, she purred. I didn't expect the famous Nero Wolfe to send such personable company. I smiled. He's generous that way. Mind if I ask about your late husband? Her lips curved like a cat's stretch. Mind? Oh, I mind many things, but not conversation. Come in. She moved like smoke, offering me a drink and a view that could ruin concentration. Howard was brilliant, she said. Impulsive, difficult. but brilliant. Brilliant enough to make enemies? Her eyes flashed. He made allies until they stopped being useful. That was close enough to a confession for round one. When I left, she brushed my sleeve. Lightly, deliberately. "Tell Mr. Wolfe," she said. "I hope he appreciates your diplomacy." "Lady," I told her, "he doesn't appreciate anything until it's solved." Half an hour later, she called me back. "You left too soon," she said. I doubted it, but returned anyway. She'd traded silk for sincerity, or a close counterfeit. "Howard wasn't all bad," she began, eyes glistening in perfect sync with her mascara. "He said Martin Latham owed him. They were partners once. There were arrangements." "Blackmail?" I asked. Her hand trembled. "Business leverage," she corrected. "He said he only wanted his due. From a $250,000 charity fund." She bit her lip. "Howard didn't steal it. He just knew who did." That sounded like the same thing to me, but I let it pass. When I stood to leave, she caught my arm. "He was frightened, Mr. Goodwin. The day before he died, he said someone sent him a red-sealed envelope. He wouldn't tell me what was inside." I nodded slowly. Maybe because he didn't live long enough to open it. Her perfume followed me out. Expensive, heavy, and designed to make a man forget he'd just been lied to. When I got back, Wolfe was missing from his desk, which meant the orchids were getting more attention than the human race. Fritz was stacking empty beer bottles like trophies of surrender. "He has been up there for hours," Fritz whispered, muttering about invitations, geometry, and death. "That's our boy," I said. "Pour me a glass before the apocalypse." At 4 o'clock sharp, Wolfe called down, "Archie!" His voice had that special tone, the one that meant he'd either solved something or was preparing to ruin my day. When I climbed to the plant rooms, the heat hit like judgment. Wolfe stood among his orchids, hands behind his back, glaring at them as though one might confess. "The pattern is emerging," he said. "Our killer composes in triplets. Invitations, deaths, correspondences. It is a game of symmetry." "That's lovely," I said. "You want me to send flowers to the next victim?" He grunted. "No, prepare the office. Tonight we summon the players." By the time he came downstairs, Wolfe looked reborn, if a resurrection could occur without leaving the chair. He rang for Fritz, ordered beer, and announced, "Archie, I am prepared to illuminate the benighted." "Which benighted?" I asked. "All of them. Mrs. Latham, Dr. Poole, Evelyn Ross, Gordon Vance. They will assemble here tomorrow at 6. I raised an eyebrow. "You planning a party or a firing squad?" "Both," he said evenly. "Their evasions have ripened into necessity. It is time to prune." He dictated the telegrams, each phrased like an invitation from Judgment Day. Fritz hovered, aghast, as if expecting gunfire instead of guests. When Wolfe finally leaned back, satisfied, he added, "And, Archie, ensure Mr. Kramer is informed." Belatedly. "Wouldn't want to deprive him of the spectacle." "Precisely," Wolfe said, eyes closing. "The man has earned his humiliation." I was halfway through the first round of phone calls when fate decided to ring the bell for me. The bell rang once, sharp, urgent. Fritz hurried out and returned with an envelope resting on a silver tray, like bad news disguised as a dessert. "For you, Mr. Goodwin," he said nervously. My name was written in black ink, neat as a death warrant. The seal, crimson wax, same as the others. Wolfe looked up, eyes narrowing. "Do not touch it." "Relax," I said, holding it by the corner. "Maybe it's fan mail." He barked, "Archie!" the way a man barks when he's about to lose something important, namely, me. I set it down on his desk. There, unopened, happy. He stared at it for a long moment, lips tight. The circle contracts. Someone is either taunting us or warning us. Both are intolerable. "Then maybe it's time we open one." "Not yet," he said. "Let the killer think he still conducts the orchestra." "Fine," I said, turning for the phone again. But if that thing starts humming, I'm quitting. He didn't laugh, which worried me more than the envelope. It arrived at noon, a neat brown envelope with my name written in handwriting too polite for extortion and too neat for friendship. The courier claimed he didn't know who sent it, which is usually code for "I prefer breathing." Inside was a photograph, Martin Latham shaking hands with Howard Dane. Behind them, a safe stood open like a guilty mouth. Beneath the photo, a typed note read, "Silence buys survival." I took it straight to Wolfe, who raised one eyebrow. "Congratulations, Archie," he said. "You are now the recipient of a death threat disguised as etiquette." "Nice stationery, though," I said. "Do I frame it or run?" He motioned for the envelope. "Neither. You will place it on my desk and cease posturing." The wax seal on the note was the same crimson as before. Wolfe studied it, frowning. "It seems the author now addresses his correspondence to you. How flattering." I grinned. He must have heard I handle Wolfe's fan mail. Wolfe's reply was a glare that could have boiled coffee. Wolfe examined the photograph like it had personally insulted his ancestry. "A forgery of motive," he muttered. "Theatrical, self-conscious, and absurd." "Meaning what?" I asked. "Someone's framing the dead for sport." He scowled. "Meaning our correspondent seeks reaction, not reason. These performances, as I must call them, are meant for idiots." I leaned on the desk. "Then maybe he picked the wrong audience." "Perhaps not," Wolfe said. "You have the virtue of being visible, impulsive, and, to certain minds, exploitable." That was his way of saying I made good bait. He laid the photo beside the others and sighed. "Our antagonist has taste in symmetry. 2 dead, 1 warned, 1 threatened. If he intends a finale, the cast is nearly complete." "Wonderful," I said. "Should I bring popcorn or a pistol?" "Neither," Wolfe snapped. "You will bring Saul Panzer." The order meant the game had turned official, and Wolfe never hires Saul unless he smells the end coming. Saul arrived 20 minutes later, punctual as a Swiss watch and twice as quiet. Wolfe briefed him in 4 sentences flat, ending with, "Dr. Edwin Poole. Observe discreetly. Report exhaustively." Saul nodded once, which for him was a speech. Then Wolfe turned to me. "Summon Mr. Cather. Miss Evelyn Ross requires attention." When Ori showed up, Wolfe's eyes gleamed. "You will follow her, note her contacts, and refrain from gallantry." Ori smirked. "You wound me, boss." "Your vanity does that unaided," Wolfe replied. "Proceed." When they were gone, Wolfe leaned back and folded his hands. "Motion without meaning," he said, "is the indulgence of fools and dancers. I prefer purpose." I grinned. "Fine. But if your purpose involves me staying still, we'll need a double order of patience." He closed his eyes. "Patience," he murmured, "is the ally of inevitability." That was Wolfe for sit down and shut up. So I did, mostly, while wondering which of his 2 bloodhounds would sniff trouble first. By dusk, Saul called in from a payphone on West End Avenue. "Poole met Vance," he said, his voice as dry as his humour. "Riverside Cafe, corner booth, coffee not whiskey, talking low, both nervous." "Plotting or reminiscing?" I asked. "Couldn't hear much, but they weren't exchanging recipes. Body language was tight, like a couple of accountants hiding murder in the books." Wolfe, listening on the extension, grunted. "Poole and Vance, a doctor and a lawyer, 2 professions that thrive on human frailty. Their alliance is not coincidence." "Want me to tail them next?" Saul asked. "No," Wolfe said. "You have observed enough. Let them marinate in mutual guilt." When the line clicked off, Wolfe said, "They dine together to synchronize falsehoods. By tomorrow their stories will match, which renders them useless." "Maybe," I said, "but I'd still like to see what dessert they order." "Archie," Wolfe said, Curiosity is not an instrument of logic. Maybe not, I told him, but it keeps me employed. Ori's call came in at 8. Evelyn Ross just made a stop on 32nd, he said. Pawn shop. Old, dusty, and discreet. She sold something. What kind of something? A diamond brooch, heavy piece, belonged to Mrs. Latham. I asked the clerk after she left, said she looked pale enough to faint, but walked out with cash. I relayed that to Wolfe. He looked pleased, which, for him, means less gloomy than usual. The brooch, he said, symbolizes the convergence of greed and guilt. One might almost admire it. She probably admired the cash more, I said. Pfui. Money is transient. Fear endures. She knows something, or someone owns her silence. So, I said, blackmail. Wolfe nodded. Undoubtedly, but the direction remains unclear. He reached for his beer. Archie, we shall now indulge in my least favorite exercise. Waiting, I groaned. That again? He raised a finger. Patience, Archie. Patience compels the fool to act. He was right. The fool was already moving. Midnight found me restless, and Wolfe immovable. I was pacing. He was thinking, which meant the furniture might outlast us both. You know, I said, we've got enough to call Kramer. 2 suspects in a conspiracy, 1 nervous, secretary, 1 pawned brooch, and 1 very tired detective. Me. He didn't open his eyes. Premature arrest invites failure. I prefer success. Sure, but success doesn't usually come with a curfew. He ignored me, which was his favorite conversational tactic. Finally, he said, Patience, Archie, is the ally of inevitability. That's your second sermon tonight. Then perhaps repetition will aid retention. He took a long sip of beer and added, We are being watched. That did it. I turned to the window. Nothing but dark street and rain. By who? Inevitability, he murmured. That was Wolfe speak for someone's about to make a mistake. And right on cue, we heard Fritz drop a tray upstairs, followed by a scream. The sound tore through the brownstone like a warning. Wolfe and I bolted, yes, he actually moved, up the stairs to the orchid rooms. The sight stopped us cold. Pots overturned, rare blossoms shredded, glass shattered across the tiles. Wolfe's beloved sanctuary looked like it had hosted a fistfight between chaos and vengeance. Fritz stood trembling near the doorway. I was bringing the evening beer, sir, he stammered. Then I heard something, a noise, and... Wolfe brushed past him, face pale, but burning with fury. He bent to a Vanderbloom, pinned under a knife. The blade held a scrap of paper, folded, sealed in crimson wax. I pried it loose and read the message aloud. Too late. For once, Wolfe said nothing. He just stared at the wreckage, the orchids he'd nurtured for 20 years, crushed and poisoned by a hand that wanted to wound more than flesh. I said quietly, Well, that's official. It's personal now. Wolfe's voice came low and cold. Archie, summon everyone. The reckoning begins. You've never really lived until you've seen Nero Wolfe in the throes of horticultural outrage. The man can shrug off murder, treachery, and tax audits, but mess with his orchids, and you've signed your own warrant. When I found him in the wrecked plant rooms, his face had gone the color of unripe plums. Fritz hovered near the door, muttering prayers in German. Wolfe turned slowly toward me and said, in a voice that could freeze boiling water, Archie, you will redeem our violated sanctum. I didn't ask how. When Wolfe talks like that, he doesn't mean, please fix the wallpaper. Use any means short of arson, he added. We are besieged by a mind both presumptuous and vile. It will not suffice merely to endure. Fine, I said. I'll take my halo and hit the streets. Do, he growled, and if possible, bring back a fragment of reason. That was Wolfe's way of saying I was his last hope. God help him. If Wolfe's idea of revenge was orchids and indignation, mine was sidewalks and legwork. Saul Panzer met me at 9th Avenue, looking as comfortable as a cat in a coal chute. Wolfe wants eyes on everyone, I said. Doctors, secretaries, lawyers, and widows, the usual civic-minded crowd. Saul nodded. I'll take the uptown leads. You cover the downtown grit. That's the beauty of Saul. Efficient, word economy like a telegram, but you can bet the rent on his instincts. We split up. I started with the pawn shop, figuring Evelyn Ross's conscience might be as shaky as her jewelry. Saul promised to check the good doctor's trail. Hospitals, banks, and whatever cafe served moral bankruptcy with sugar. By noon, my shoes had lost their shine, my tie was regretting its existence, and I hadn't found a single thing Wolfe would call reason. But that was about to change, in a pawn shop that smelled like dust and secrets. The old man behind the counter looked like he'd been born among watch parts. I laid the photo of the brooch on the glass. Recognize this? His mouth puckered like a lemon. I told that other fella, I don't deal in stolen goods. Sure, I said, and I'm the Pope's barber. Let's skip to the confession part. A little pressure, a little charm, and the man folded faster than Fritz's napkins. The girl sold it, he muttered. Came in nervous. Said she needed cash, wouldn't haggle. I remember because she had class, not like most. When? He squinted. Same day that fancy fellow dropped dead in a taxi, made the morning papers. I slipped him a bill for memory maintenance and walked out with the timeline Wolfe would savor. Evelyn Ross hadn't just pawned guilt, she'd stamped it with a date. And if there's one thing Wolfe hates more than broken orchids, it's a tidy coincidence. Saul phoned me at 2. His voice, as usual, was short on adjectives. Pool's got deposits, he said. That's nice, I said. Maybe he's saving for a conscience. No, too big. 2 new ones this week, different banks, same handwriting on the slips. That got my attention. How big? 5 grand each. Cash. I whistled. That's a lot of house calls. Unless the patient paid with silence, Saul said. That line stuck with me. If Poole was on someone's payroll, the prescription wasn't aspirin. I reported back to Wolfe. He just muttered, predictable. Medical men often diagnose the soul and sell the cure. Meaning? Meaning he's guilty, though of what I shall determine later. It was his version of encouragement. I decided to translate it as keep working, Archie, because Wolfe's not the type to say thank you until the case is over. And sometimes not even then. I was halfway through a sandwich when the doorbell announced trouble in a trench coat. Kramer barged in, puffing like a steamboat and waving papers. Your boyfriend's in for it, Goodwin, he barked. And so are you. I leaned back. Delightful. What's the charge this time? Failure to faint. Gordon Vance is missing. His office cleared. Out this morning. No note, no trace. And get this. He slapped a report onto Wolfe's desk. Mrs. Latham's cigars were poisoned. Same stuff as the envelopes. Wolfe's eyebrows lifted. Indeed. Then perhaps she intended to inhale eternity. Kramer scowled. You think this is funny? That house is crawling with cops, and I've got reporters sniffing like hounds. Someone's tying this mess in knots. Then, Inspector, Wolfe said calmly, perhaps you might refrain from tugging at the rope. Kramer snorted, stomped out, and slammed the door. Wolfe exhaled heavily. Archie, our adversary adds insult to homicide. He kills, then mocks. Yeah, I said, and now he's adding guests to the disappearing act. At 3 o'clock, I was nursing coffee at a corner lunch counter, trying to make sense of the day's mess, when a kid in a courier cap slid onto the stool beside me. Archie Goodwin? He asked. Depends who's asking. If it's the taxman, he's dead. He grinned nervously and handed me an envelope. No wax seal, but Wolfe's handwriting, bold, immaculate. Inside, 1 line, return. The guest I refused has arrived, in spirit. I didn't bother with dessert. The walk back to the brownstone took 15 minutes, and a gut full of bad hunches. Wolfe doesn't send notes when the phone exists unless he's making a point, or a trap sprung. When I reached the stoop, Fritz opened the door with a face that could have sold tragedy wholesale. He waits in the office, Fritz whispered. Who? He swallowed. Not who, what? That didn't help my appetite either. Wolfe sat behind his desk, motionless, his eyes half closed and dangerous. The air felt heavy, like before a storm. You took your time, he said quietly. I walked, I told him. You said the guest arrived. Who dropped by? Santa Claus. He pointed to the envelope from this morning, the one with my name on it. It lay open now, the photograph gone. Someone entered while Fritz was downstairs, he said. No sign of force, no footprints. Yet the room was disturbed. I frowned. So we've got a ghost thief. No, worse. We have a mind that moves unseen, because it never leaves. I blinked. Meaning, Wolfe said, his voice as soft as velvet and twice as dangerous. Our killer was here all along, within our circle. The intruder is not external, but internal. Inside the house, I asked. Inside the case, he said. And perhaps... He fixed me with a look that could slice marble, closer than we imagine. That ended our chat. Wolfe doesn't raise his voice when lightning's about to strike. He just waits for it to hit. By dusk, the brownstone looked less like a home and more like a courtroom run by orchids. Wolfe sat enthroned behind his desk, mountainous and unmovable, while I managed the door and the guests. Though calling this bunch guests stretched hospitality past breaking. Mrs. Celia Latham arrived first, black-clad and trembling like a guilty conscience. Evelyn Ross followed, pale as her gloves, eyes darting like a trapped bird. Dr. Poole came next, sweating through his collar, carrying the unmistakable scent of panic. Then Kramer lumbered in, grunting, "This better not be another of your stunts, Wolfe." "Inspector," Wolfe said coolly, "my stunts are reserved for the intelligent. Please sit." The room settled into an uneasy silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and Wolfe's measured breathing. The air felt heavy, as if even the orchids upstairs were holding their breath. "Archie," Wolfe said at last, "bolt the door. I dislike interruptions during revelations." And just like that, the execution began, verbal of course, but no less deadly. Wolfe folded his hands across his middle and began the way a priest might open mass, sonorous, slow, and certain of his audience's sins. 3 envelopes, he said. 3 deaths, or near enough. A sequence of frauds designed by an amateur mathematician, and a desperate one. Dr. Poole coughed. "Frauds? What?" "Silence," Wolfe commanded. "You mistake verbosity for innocence. I refer not to financial fraud, but intellectual." Each letter was a calculated symbol in an equation of deceit. He gestured to the sealed exhibits on his desk. 1 to me, 1 to Latham, 1 to Dane. Their common denominator, vanity. Each recipient believed himself significant enough to be threatened. A conceit upon which murder could thrive. Kramer snorted. "You're saying math killed them?" "No," Wolfe said. "Human stupidity did, but the arithmetic was elegant." Mrs. Latham's gloved hands twitched. Evelyn stared at the carpet. Wolfe's gaze swept the room, settling on each face like a judge tallying guilt, and the totals were starting to add up. "Now," Wolfe continued, "to the substance, quite literally, of these communications." He lifted one envelope with the delicacy of a man handling nitroglycerin. The wax seals were not decoration, nor were they warnings. They were weapons. Dr. Poole blanched. "Impossible." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "Possible, provable, and already proven." The residue upon the inner edge contained trace molecules of tetraphenyl arsenic, an exotic derivative of an evaporative toxin, colorless, odorless, and fatal within hours when absorbed through the skin. Kramer shifted in his chair. "So they got poisoned by mail." "An imprecise phrasing, but acceptable," Wolfe replied. "The murderer relied upon curiosity, the most predictable of human failings. The first touch delivered the dose, the second ensured death." Evelyn gasped softly. Mrs. Latham's head bowed. Wolfe went on, relentless. The chemistry is admirable, the intent deplorable. Yet I must commend the artistry. Murder rarely achieves such symmetry. That earned a growl from Kramer and a shudder from everyone else. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half-lidded, voice dropping to that low rumble that usually means the killing stroke is near. The toxin was merely the instrument, he said. The motive, however, was psychological. The envelopes served first not as death warrants, but as instruments of terror. He turned his gaze toward Evelyn. Fear is the most efficient poison of all. It kills before the body expires. Evelyn trembled. I swear, I didn't know. I do not accuse you, Miss Ross, Wolfe said. You were merely convenient, a silent participant in a play of guilt. Someone intended that both men, Latham and Dane, should fear exposure more than death itself. Alas, fear is ungovernable. It drove them to handle what should have remained untouched. Kramer grunted. So you're saying somebody wanted to scare them, and they ended up dead by accident? Precisely, Wolfe said. A tragedy born of intention blurred by emotion, and of retribution poorly aimed. He paused. But the hand behind it was not blind. Silence stretched until you could have heard Fritz polishing silver 3 rooms away. Then Wolfe's gaze fixed on Mrs. Latham. Madam, he said, only one person in this room possessed the knowledge and the motive to expect my refusal of a personal visit. Only one person calculated my distaste for human intrusion as part of the plan. Mrs. Latham didn't move. You think I think, Wolfe said coldly, you are the architect of this misbegotten geometry. You sent the envelopes, one to frighten your husband, one to his accomplice, and one to me, to verify your handiwork. Her breath caught. She folded her hands tightly. I didn't mean to kill them. Kramer slammed a fist on the arm of his chair. That's a confession. Silence, Wolfe snapped. You're interrupting truth with noise. Mrs. Latham's composure cracked like glass under heat. Tears welled, but she kept her chin high. I only wanted justice, she whispered. Wolfe sighed. Madam, justice, when mixed with vanity, curdles into folly. Her story came out between sobs, halting but heavy. My brother, she said, trusted them, Martin Latham and Howard Dane. They promised him returns from their charity fund, $250,000 in donations. When it failed, he was blamed, ruined, and he took his life. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, not in sympathy, but in acknowledgement. And so you sought to frighten his betrayers into confession. She nodded. I studied poisons, only to frighten, not to harm. I thought a touch, a warning. They'd panic and confess. But Martin handled his envelope too soon. Howard tried to hide his. Fate, Wolfe murmured, is not bound by human arithmetic. You multiplied revenge and divided reason. Kramer rubbed his temples. Lady, that's the damnedest story I've heard. I didn't mean for death, she whispered again, trembling. Only fear. Fear, Wolfe said softly, is never singular in effect. For once, even Kramer didn't argue. The air felt thinner, the light dimmer, and we all knew the final act hadn't played yet. Wolfe leaned back, weary for once. Mrs. Latham, he said, the toxin in those envelopes has already claimed 2 victims. I suggest you... He stopped. She had reached for her purse. Madam, I advise... Too late. Her fingers brushed the flap of an envelope half visible within, sealed in crimson wax. She gasped, softly, and slumped forward before anyone moved. Kramer lunged, but I caught her as she slid from the chair. Her eyes were open, fixed on nothing. The purse dropped, spilling the envelope onto the carpet. It gleamed under the lamplight, that same infernal red. Fritz appeared at the door, pale as milk. Good heavens! Wolfe's voice came low and flat. Archie, do not touch it. I nodded. Don't worry, I've developed an allergy. He closed his eyes. The final symmetry, he murmured. Her justice completed the circle. Kramer swore under his breath. And somewhere in the brownstone, one of Wolfe's orchids dropped a petal, like the last note of a requiem Wolfe never wanted to hear. Kramer packed up the evidence like he was hauling garbage instead of proof of murder. His men carried off the envelopes, the gloves, and what was left of Mrs. Latham's handbag. Kramer himself lingered, scowling at Wolfe the way a man looks at a crossword puzzle that keeps winning. "Lucky guesses again, eh, Wolfe?" he grunted. "Luck," Wolfe said smoothly, "is the refuge of the inept, Inspector. You may rely on it. I prefer deduction." That got a growl worthy of the Bronx Zoo. He slammed his hat on, shot me a glare that could have stripped paint, and stomped out, muttering something that sounded like windbag. Saul and Ori, who'd been leaning on the wall, exchanged a grin. The kind men wear when they're unpaid, but vindicated. "Buy you boys dinner," I said, "if Wolfe ever lets me near the checkbook." Ori chuckled. "That'll be the day." The door shut behind them, and the brownstone finally exhaled, tired and too quiet. Dinner that night was Fritz at his best: pheasant, wine, and a sauce that could make you forgive civilization. Unfortunately, Wolfe didn't notice. He sat at the head of the table, arms folded, face locked in neutral, and the food cooled untouched. Fritz hovered like an anxious parent. "You do not eat, Herr Wolfe?" "No," Wolfe said curtly. It would be an affront to gastronomy to consume nourishment in this mood. Translation: he was sulking. I kept my fork busy to avoid comment. Nothing disturbs a man in mourning like conversation, and Wolfe was mourning something. Pride, maybe, or humanity. Finally, I said, "Fritz, the pheasant's perfect. Maybe tomorrow you can reheat Genius." Fritz sighed. "It will not be the same." Neither, apparently, would Wolfe. He pushed back from the table and lumbered upstairs without a word. When Wolfe walks away from food, the earth's definitely off its axis. I found him later among the orchids, surrounded by the humid air that passed for his temple of serenity. The flowers looked fine, but Wolfe didn't. His shoulders sagged, and the usual smug satisfaction of being right was nowhere in sight. "Archie," he said finally, not turning, "female dramatics are the curse of civilization. They complicate justice and make sentiment an accomplice." "Sure," I said, "but they also make life interesting." He sighed, a long, slow exhalation that stirred the blossoms nearest him. Mrs. Latham was intelligent, refined, yet she chose folly cloaked as justice, to mar beauty with vengeance, intolerable. "You're telling me," I said. "I spent a week chasing ghosts and poison just to end up with 3 corpses and an ulcer." His fingers brushed a violet bloom. "Emotion," he said quietly, "is the untidiest of all human afflictions." For once I didn't argue. Even his orchids smelled like regret. That night we didn't work. We just sat. Wolfe in his chair, me across, with 2 glasses of brandy and the kind of silence that has its own weight. When he finally spoke, it was almost gentle. "I should have accepted the guest, Archie. It might have saved a life." I looked at him. "You refused a visit, not destiny." He grunted softly. "An evasion, yet perhaps accurate." He took a slow sip. "I misjudged her. I mistook pride for composure." "That's rare company for you, making mistakes." He shot me a glance that would have wilted wallpaper. "Even God's heir, Mr. Goodwin, though I make no such claim." "Don't worry," I said. "No one else does either." That earned the faintest smirk. He swirled the glass, watching the amber whirl. "Death is vulgar, Archie. When it intrudes upon intellect, it leaves an odor that even orchids cannot dispel." The clock ticked. We drank in silence. Some truths don't need answering. After the brandy and the silence came the grunt, Wolfe's all-purpose punctuation mark. It can mean confession, irritation, or the end of the world, depending on context. This one landed somewhere between resignation and apology. He leaned back, eyes half shut. "Archie," he said, "file the report. with as little embellishment as your conscience allows. Meaning you'll read it and cut half. Meaning, he said, that facts need no embroidery, especially yours. Fine. I'll keep it bare. Just you, me, poison, and a touch of divine irony. He closed his eyes completely. That will suffice. I knew that was dismissal, but I lingered a moment anyway. The office felt smaller, like all the air had gone into Wolfe's thoughts and stayed there. When I left, he was still in his chair, silent, solid, and about as conversational as a statue of justice after closing hours. Morning brought a change, not in Wolfe, but in the mail. Fritz brought it in on a silver tray, as usual, and set it down. One plain envelope, he said. No wax, no mark. That last bit got Wolfe's attention. He slit it open carefully, then frowned. The paper inside was blank. Not a word, not a mark, just emptiness. Well, I said, maybe our killer's sending stationery now. Wolfe didn't answer. He stared at it a moment longer, then placed it flat on the desk. Archie, he said quietly, burn it. I blinked. Burn a blank page? Seems extreme even for you. An empty message, he said, is often the loudest. I will not allow it to speak. There was something in his tone that stopped me from arguing. I struck a match and dropped it on the paper. It curled and blackened without protest. Now, Wolfe murmured, let us have peace, if only temporary. As the last of the ash drifted into the tray, I caught Wolfe watching the flames afterglow. Not the letter, not the act, but the fire itself. You really think that was from her? I asked. He didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the smoke. Some invitations, Archie, he said at length, should remain unanswered. The dead are persistent correspondents. That's poetic, I said. Want me to quote it in the report? He gave me one of those glances that can flatten humour at 10 paces. No. Fritz entered, carrying the morning coffee, and the familiar aroma began patching the world back together. Wolfe reached for his cup, took a sip, and leaned back with a sigh that almost resembled contentment. Archie, he said, we are finished with envelopes. Good, I said. Let's stick to checks. They're safer. He grunted, which I chose to translate as agreement. In the end, justice came quietly, delivered not by the law, but by conscience, and sealed in crimson wax. Wolfe would never admit it, but perhaps even he knew that reason cannot always tidy the chaos of a human heart. The orchids will bloom again, the city will forget, and somewhere a letter remains unopened, waiting for no one. What do you think? Was Mrs. Latham seeking justice, or only forgiveness, too late to matter? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the mystery, be sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves detective stories, and subscribe for more. Sometimes, even the sharpest minds can't escape the shadows of the past.